Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, I'm going to be looking at Rocky Linux 8.3, Release Candidate 1, right after this. So let's take a look at Rocky Linux from a standpoint of what is it. As you probably remember, I did a video back in December talking about CentOS and the fact that all future development of the regular CentOS Linux was going to be dropped, and CentOS Streams would be the replacement OS. But of course, as many of you know, CentOS Streams is not really a candidate for a stable production release that we have all come to know from CentOS itself. There are a number of options, and today another one has surfaced. So as of this morning, the Rocky Linux Enterprise Foundation has released their first candidate version of their 8.3 release. And so just remember that this is truly a beta, but it allows you to bring in applications, test it, figure out if you can find some bugs, you can report it to the test team. And I mean, we can talk about that at the end on some of the things that you can do. But the first thing is that right now, Rocky Linux offers two ISO images, one for x86 64 and the other one for ARM 64 architectures. So, yeah, it does not have the PowerPC release. It doesn't have some of the other releases that CentOS had yet, but I'm sure they'll probably get to that eventually. There are three current versions of the ISO. There is minimal, and DVD and boot images. And of course, minimal allows you to bring up just a core set of functionality for the operating system, and that allows you then to tailor the fit of the applications and software that your particular server may need. Now, of course, there are other options. You can install a workstation version of Rocky Linux as well, and we'll talk about that when we go into the install. But Rocky Linux functions just like CentOS Linux did. So, in other words, it is in the same place as CentOS Linux was in the downstream rollout of changes that took place. So, in CentOS, changes normally go through Fedora, and then they become candidates for movement into Red Hat. And at that point, the Red Hat team would look at what they wanted to include, and then they would do a build on the Red Hat Linux. Those ISOs then, and the source ISOs then go back into their respective repositories, and then were picked up by CentOS once the Red Hat team had gone through testing. So, and then the CentOS team would make changes to allow the system to be rebranded from Red Hat to CentOS, and then other things and features that CentOS provided. So this is in the same place. This is going to offer exactly the same kind of functionality that CentOS Linux did. It is bug-for-bug compatible with Red Hat Linux 8.3, and that is the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.3. But, of course, at this stage, with it being a release candidate, and wisely so, you would not want to risk putting this into production until it has been thoroughly vetted by the community and by the test team to make sure that it's free of bugs and has proper security controls, and we're not going to be seeing major problems with it when we get it out into the field. And we don't want downtime in our production servers. That's a bad thing. That gets people fired. Rocky Linux 8.3 currently supports both repository types, in which you have the base OS repo, which is basically your core set of operating system functionality, And then the application stream is a new concept that this was introduced in 8.3. But anyway, the idea behind application streams is you can now have multiple versions of user space components, and those are delivered more frequently than the base OS system components. There's several install options. Some of the major ones are you can install a server with a GUI. I would recommend doing that unless it's a home server and it's just something that you want to play with. But and typically in servers, you don't want to expose any kind of unexpected access to the system through a root-owned application port like X11. Also, there's a workstation version, a server which is just a text-only version of the system. And there's some other options in there, and we'll cover that when we get to the installer. So the Linux kernel is 4.18-240. Those of you who are used to Arch or Ubuntu or Pop! OS or some of the or even Manjaro are probably used to seeing much more recent kernels in the world of servers. So the original release update on 4.18 was back August the 12th of 2018. The major prominent features are introduced restartable sequences, that allows user mode applications to restart particular pieces of code. There's also support for unprivileged mounts, so that users which are not root are able to mount certain devices at certain locations. It also provided the first implementation of net filter support for the Berkeley packet filter system, and so a complete support. Now, BPF has been in the kernel for quite some time, but it has not been feature complete, like if you wanted to use it for tracing and you wanted to use it for monitoring of your system. A lot of the advanced features didn't come until 4.18 in the kernel. It also supports zero latency TCP/IP over as an API. XF-XDP is a protocol set which is for networking that allows for high performance networking. There's support for future, in quotes, AMD Vega 20 hardware, which of course now is hardware which is obsolete. Or you might still find it, but it is not the current offering from AMD. Let's put it that way. Support for Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 SoC, system on a chip. The 845, again, is not the latest CPUs from Qualcomm either. So, but this kernel does provide support for those. The installer permits and RC1 allows you to put a root password on and also create a user account before you actually begin the installer process, which in the past was done later in the installation, but now it's done up front. The Red Hat offers RHEL for Edge. I don't know if Rocky Linux will include this option for 8.3, but I did not see any indication of it. 8.3 offered a number of technology previews as well, such as NVMe TCP. That provides the ability to share NVMe storage over TCP/IP between servers. XDP technology previews provides the use of XDP features on CPUs other than AMD. The other one is the protocol that goes along with it, which is AF-XDP, which provides the high performance packet processing that that particular element is requiring. Also Stratus, and I have done videos on the Stratus file system. But Stratus is a new file system that is copy on write, has snapshotting, and has all of the features that you would come to expect from things like Btrfs or from ZFS. There's also Podman containers, which are a technology preview in 8.3. So if you're looking for OCI compliant containers, then Podman is Red Hat's recommendation going forward for that. Security, there's been a number of changes here, like SE Linux policy changes. Basically, these are just trying to make it easier for things to work together, whether they're sharing memory or whether they're moving data between different processes. In the past, SE Linux has gotten in the way and become a problem, and so these are policy changes that kind of relax some of that by default. There's also performance enhancements and bug fixes for OpenSCAP. IP table enhancements and bug fixes there. I thought probably the best thing to do today is kind of walk through a demo of the installation. There are manuals that are online with Rocky Linux, and I went out and looked at some of them, and it is pretty impressive. Not only do they have manuals for installation, they have manuals for specific tasking that you would probably find yourself having to do in a production environment or a production server environment. So yeah, you can go out and look at that. Oh my gosh, there is so much that is available. That team is they're just doing an amazing job. I have never seen this level of documentation in this state this soon. So considering they've only had 4 months to work on this. So yeah, anyway, let's take a look at it. So I guess the first place to start is here, which is the announcement, and this is in their community forum. So if you go out to the Rocky Linux website, which is rockylinux.org, you'll find a link to their forums, and in there is a community forum where they do announcements. And the newest one, of course, today was Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation is announcing the release of their first candidate release of Rocky Linux 8.3. So there's the downloads where you can go to actually get it. We can go there, and you'll see that there are 2 architectures currently being offered, and then there is a link to the documentation. Now they say base OS packages are offered, but it does install the app streams as well. I checked that. So if you're concerned that app streams is missing, it is not. So don't worry about that. It definitely builds out the repo for it. So let's see. And then it says if you want to get involved with the testing team and help them go through the particular pieces that they want to have tested, you can do that if you wish. And I always try to encourage people to contribute. I mean, if one of the duties that you have as a user of open source is to try to give something back. So yeah, so I'm probably going to do it. I'm probably going to get involved, do some testing for them. So I currently have a couple of installations. I'll just go ahead and do a third one. Again, I'm on Proxmox to do this, which works fine for me. I mean, I don't have a problem with this. I am going to use Spice again. Glutton for punishment, right? But I am going to try that. I'm going to put this over on the local VM, and I'm going to give it 4 processors. Now, Rocky does not, even with a GUI, Rocky does not consume an awful lot of memory. So I could get by with 2 gig. It might be a little tight, but I'm going to give it my usual 4 gig. And then if I was really serious about doing this, I probably would give it 8 and turn it into a workstation. So I'm going to go ahead and build this out, and it's working on it. Okay, we'll go ahead and start it up. Give it a second to turn green. And then we'll go to the console window here. I'll get a connector here for that. Now, this is going to bounce on me, but that's okay. I'm going to bring it up so at least you can see. So I can test the media, and I can install. I'm just going to go ahead and go right into the install. It resized it. And I'll resize it back so that you can see what's going on. And it resized it again. I'm going to escape this. I've already done a test on it, but you should do one at least once on your media to make sure that it downloaded okay. And you're not going to find you're having problems because there's something wrong with, the installation. media that you're trying to use to install Rocky Linux with. So this should bring up Anaconda, and it does. It's been rebranded. So yeah, English is my default language, and it's US variant. Of course, yeah, this is unstable pre-release software. Don't use it for critical. I would say not just critical. I would say any production environment you shouldn't be using this in, unless it's a test environment that you happen to dedicate to this sort of thing. So yeah. Okay. Installation from local media, and then here's some of the options you have for installation. I can do server with GUI. I don't recommend that. You can do a server, do a minimal install, workstation, custom OS, and virtualization host. And as you select these, your choices for additional software will change. So you can bring in additional tools if you wish. I know I said not to do it, but I'm interested in seeing what it actually adds on to this and what other features I have. So I can add a Windows file server if I want, which allows me to transfer files between Rocky Linux and Windows. A debugging server if I'm using this for development, which I might go back and install later. FTP, I don't recommend. Don't use FTP in your servers. It does not. It has no encryption whatsoever, and your password will be sent over your network in the clear. So don't use FTP. Network services, performance tools, remote desktop clients, virtualization, blah blah blah. If you're developing for Unix environments, which there's still a few around, there's still FreeBSD, and some of those are considered legacy Unix environments. So I am going to add security tools onto this. And if I wanted to monitor, network traffic, I could add on some additional. But that's the only ones I'm going to add on today, and I'm just going to say done. And then I'll pick the default. Now, you do have some choices here where you can, if you want to just set up your own partition management strategy for your drive, you can do that, or you just want it to default. You can also say, go ahead and do the automatic, but I have some things I'd like to modify and maybe give some more space to those. So, and then you can encrypt, and of course, I think that will create an LVM partition for you to do that. So I'm not going to encrypt it. Let's see. Also, KDump is enabled. I don't have my networking turned on. I do want that. And security policies, right now, there's nothing in here. Now, normally, there would be the OSCAP. If this was a Red Hat install or a CentOS install, normally there would be the OSCAP configuration in here, which would allow you to put in rules for PCI, or for HIPAA, or for if you're in a government agency and you need to be compliant with the FIPS standards, you can do that. But this one's just to say, it's copping out, saying, okay, just tell me where the data stream server content is, and I guess I'll load it for you. But I haven't tested that, don't know if that actually works. I am going to give this a root password. Super secure one, right? And then we'll go and create a user. Now, you don't have to create a root user if you're doing this, right? So that would, if you don't put a password on the root user, it disables it. I believe is if I remember correctly on Red Hat. I don't know if Rocky does, but again, I'm not testing that today. I'm just trying to show you an installation. So you'll notice that I was able to put those in before the installation. It's most of the time on some of the older versions of Red Hat, you probably would notice that as soon as you completed this, it would start installing. So now it's waiting for me to actually tell it to install. That gives me an extra. If I have to set up a user directory and I want to jump down into a terminal window and go add some stuff, I could do that if I wanted. But anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. I will come back. It is currently it looks like 4:42, and I'll come back and we'll see how much time it took. While that's going, I wanted to show you a couple of things. Is you can come into the Red Hat side of things, and you can look at if there are any vulnerabilities that are currently open for this particular release of their code. So that's always a good place to go and make sure that you don't have anything that is going to have a strong or a critical impact to your security before you go and install something new. So anyway, currently this is, and everybody has this right now. Ubuntu has this one open, although in the 2104 they have sort of mitigated it, but yeah, this one is still open for everybody. It is a ACPI secure boot vulnerability with Grub 2. And of course, they have some ongoing issues to close for that one. But you'll see that the others, there's a critical, and you'll notice that Red Hat is usually pretty darn fast in getting things closed, especially if they are important or critical. Now, moderate, that means that somebody's going to have physical access to the machine. Maybe there has to be a certain set of software that's loaded on it. But yeah, it just means that this is not as important as these are. Critical, of course, would be, yeah, kind of stop. You might want to stop, get this fixed. Yeah, those are bad things, because that means that usually someone has a way of getting into the system and gaining root access. So anyway, I just thought I would show you that, and you can look at 8.3, 8.2, 8.4, any of those to see what are open vulnerabilities. And Red Hat, of course, like others, like Debian and Ubuntu, are open about their CVEs. They don't hide them. They don't, it's out in the open for you to look at. So, which I always appreciate, the honesty of vendors like that to do stuff like this. So, well, I'm still waiting for this to finish. So it's done. It looks like it took about 6 minutes or so to do. Now, this also had to install the GUI, so it would be a lot shorter, of course, if I was just doing a server with text. But we'll go ahead and reboot it. This is here because in the Red Hat setup, the license information is where you put your subscription key. So I imagine that this is just simply staying compatible with what Red Hat has, except in their case, they're just giving you some information about the EULA. And then we'll finish it, and then it should come up with the normal GNOME. Here's some helpful tips on your keyboards and all that. So once I get logged in, one thing to check, this is using standard Wayland. This version of Wayland does not support NVIDIA. So if you have an NVIDIA graphics card on your workstation that you want to use this on, you might want to slip down to standard or classic X11. Probably standard. Yeah. Definitely not. If you're using NVIDIA, you definitely will run into problems with Wayland. At least I have. I don't know. Maybe you guys will be lucky, but I wasn't. Okay, and then this is the welcome. Typing. No thanks. You don't need that. And then if I have some online accounts, I can set those up. I don't care about that. And then this is your getting started. That was in a lot of the older versions of GNOME. So I guess the first thing they'll take a look at here is, now this version of 8.3 has Flatpak support that you can add onto it. But I did notice when I was looking at some of the software here that this was app streams. and not, yeah, the source is the app stream repository. So these are not Flatpaks, these are actual packages. And then if I could look at what's installed. If I had any updates, I could go ahead and recheck. I don't think there'll be any because it's new, and we'll go ahead and get out of that. The other thing to look at is the settings. Now, I'm not going to do any adjustment on the screen. I could, I suppose, if I wanted to, but this is pretty typical here. I'm just curious as to memory. It's seeing all 4 gig. It is using an LLVM pipe, which of course it would use for spices. This is version 3.32.2, so that's quite a bit older than you would typically find in both Debian and Ubuntu. But again, you're going for stability. You're going for things that have been tested, time tested, not just throwing up the latest and greatest and hoping for the best. In production environments, I'll say this again, that is not desirable unless you have an absolute need for the hardware support. Thunderbolt's in here. Interesting. Although this system doesn't have it, but yeah. Let's take a look at a few things, and then I'll drop down to the command line and we'll go take a look at that. So there's the main page. That's nice. Takes you to the main page on Rocky Linux, so that you can then go to the forums are here, the wiki is here. There's a store if you want to buy merchandise to help support the project, and then a donate button if you want to just provide the money. You don't care about ordering something from them. And then if there's any news, which of course will be this one right now. Yeah. So what version of this are we running? What version of Firefox? So that's older, version 78, but that is the ESR, which you would kind of expect to find in a system that is designed for production use. So let's see. Generally, I can tell you that in most production environments I was involved with, where we did have GUIs for the workstations, we never did for the servers, but for the workstations, yeah, we generally ran behind a little bit, and if there was a security update that was forced upon us, then yeah, we would update the software on those servers as well. But generally, for us, in the environments that I worked in, that would trigger a pretty, depending upon what update was being done, that potentially could trigger a pretty lengthy update lengthy process in order to confirm that the update hasn't opened security vulnerabilities in the system. So, yeah, it would add on a few months of testing to make sure that it was ready to actually be deployed in production. So, and then there would be additional testing after that to make sure it didn't disrupt the application. So, yeah, so you had like 3 levels. You had functionality, you had security, and then you had app interoperability. So, yeah. Kind of the lengthy process. Could be 6 months, could be a year, depending upon how large the application was. But let's take a look at a few things here. Let's look at, so, well, I guess I could have done. So we're somewhere around is that about 4 gig? About 4 gig. I'm going to try that again. Yeah, 4.6 gig in disk it's requiring. A little heavy, maybe, but again, it does have a GUI on it. See how much memory is being used right now. So, 1.2 gig of memory in use, 1.1 in buffer cache. So yeah, this is getting, I mean, I've got 1.3 gig left, but you know, it will rob the buffer cache. Of course, as it does that, your performance will go down. So I guess the first thing we need to do though is install the EPL. Is it package? I always forget. Let me just do a search. I don't do Red Hat enough anymore to. I just have one server, and I don't have to do this very often. So yeah, you can see the app stream, the base OS. So it's released. Okay. I need this in order to pick up the non-free and the ones that are outside of the standard software. And of course, Red Hat, non-free is not included in the baseline. You have to actually pollute your own environment to do that. So, and I do want to do that because I have some packages I want to install, like HTOP and NeoFetch and Glances and Git, all my usual. So app streams, you'll probably notice this modular one here. Just to tell you, that is also part of the app stream. So apps can either be app stream or modular. So yeah, I probably should talk about that sometime in a video, but it is very specific to Red Hat based releases. So it probably wouldn't be of interest to you if you use Arch or you use Ubuntu or Debian. You probably wouldn't be too interested in it. Let's see. What does HTOP say? HTOP is saying 1.3 gig. I'm not going to... I don't think that would reduce too much. If I rebooted, I could do that. We could do that. Let's do that. What the heck? Let's do that. Just to clean out the install. That's about the only thing I did, but I did run the browser, and that could leave some stuff in cache. I don't think it's going to be a lot of memory, though. Probably 100 meg. Probably 100 meg. One thing I did notice is that if I go in before, I'm going to digress. If I go in here, go to displays, and I set this, okay, it doesn't persist, so that might be a bug. We may have found a bug, because when I come back up after a reboot now, it will default back to its standard 12, I think it's 1280, I think it was. But yeah, okay, let me go get a terminal window here. And then we'll do an HTOP. 1.1. So, all right, so I lied. It was 200 meg difference. But you can see the processor is not really working that hard, even though this is all running. It's not doing a lot. But then it isn't running very much either. Glances, one thing I've always appreciated about the way that the Red Hat and CentOS does is it does not expose by default my external IP address, whereas in a standard install of Glances, it does. So you have to then add options in order to exclude that. They do that automatically for you in this, so that's good. 1.4 gig in app with including the app caches, which is right here, and saying 2.2 gig free. I know a lot of people don't like that. They think that's high. That's a lot of memory. I don't. That's nothing. 1 gig? Come on. That's nothing. Let's see what NeoFetch says. Oh, that's the default logo for Linux. So I guess they aren't set up yet for this, but that's all right. 3.32, we already knew that. And the bash is 4419. We're using Adwata. Yeah, no big deal. It's also reporting that. Let's see, what else? Oh, let's go out to opt. Might as well take a look at the obvious things. Unknown release. Yeah, so it'll probably take a while for this to catch up in some of the tooling in order for them to add on the support for this particular release. I'm seeing some things that are found, but I'm not seeing. I'm sure there'll be something with this. Yeah, there's a few reds, some suggestions. Okay, let's take a look here. At 64 is what it had for the percentage. It just saw it as it rolled by. So, yeah, because I chose Intel, I've got a promiscuous interface that's open, but that's all right. We can whitelist that. So that's not a biggie. That's just, hey, you've got a bridge, which you would on a virtual machine. You have a bridge installed. And let's see. Yep, got some configuration that needs to go into SSH because it's not protected or hardened. Audit daemon. This is nothing. This is nothing. It's all the same stuff. So 64 on the base. 2 plugins enabled that it found. Not a bad run. And again, it's 303, which has been the same as it has been for a while. The other thing to look at is to make sure. Oops. So it's 418.0-240, which is exactly what Red Hat says 8.3 should be. So, but in this case, it was compiled back in April, whereas I'll bet the Red Hat one is probably a little older. But yeah, not too bad. We did the DF. We did that. I guess that's really the only things I mean, I could do this. Let's just take a look and see how well it runs. I know it's under a virtual machine, but so what? It still will have a performance number. So Sysbench, I have 4 cores, so I want to make this threads equal 4. We'll do a CPU, and then we'll do a run. This is just an integer. This is just like a integer test, random number generator for integers. See how many it does. It did 55,492. Now let me bring over this system. I'll go ahead and get it started. This is the one I'm currently running on. This is a laptop with 6 cores in it, but I have forced it to 4. And 53,000 is what I get on this. This is an older 8th gen Intel CPU. This is a Core i7 11th gen. So there's a little bit of difference between them, but it's not significant. I mean, I could probably run this 10 times and probably push this one to 54 and this one down to 54. But yeah, it's running fine. It's running okay. I think that the only other question I have about Rocky Linux is there used to be a set of compliance tests that you could do to make sure that the release was compliant with a full spec Red Hat configuration. But I'm really not all that worried about it for Rocky Linux because I know they're drawing from the same source packages as Red Hat is. So, yeah, I'm not really too worried about compliance. This is just an initial look for me, and I think what I will do now is I will leave this one up because I always like to use a server GUI for a workstation, and then I use the server to actually be my production box, and I'll probably put it up in Proxmox at least initially, and then as I complete my testing, coming over from the CentOS version, and I'll start that even though this is a release candidate because I would like to get an early start to get through the testing that I'm going to need to do in order to ensure that when I get to December, I can rely on either. Now, of course, there is another variant of Red Hat which I could use, which is Alma Linux, but I need to determine which one I'm going to go with. And I think the major difference between Alma Linux and Rocky Linux is Rocky Linux is taking steps to prevent a takeover like what happened with CentOS. I don't know what Alma Linux is doing. I know that they're committed to the project. I know that their project team is from the cloud side of things, so they're not going to go away anytime soon. I'm not worried about that. But Alma Linux came up awful fast, and I'm wondering if all they did was a rebranding, whereas Rocky Linux is doing more than just rebranding. So, yeah, I mean, they're actually trying to prevent Red Hat from taking over Rocky Linux, and then we end up back in this situation down the road maybe 3 or 4 years from now where if Red Hat takes over Rocky Linux and they decide to dump it again, we'll be right back here where we were with CentOS. And so I don't know what Alma Linux is doing in that regard. I don't. I'm going to review it and we'll find out together. I just don't know. Probably ought to get somebody from both teams on and talk to them and see, hey, what are you doing to protect yourself from putting this all back in the same box again? Anyway. That's all I had for today. I hope you enjoyed this, at least a look at Rocky Linux. Now, I looked at it kind of from the Red Hat perspective because that's what you're trying to replace, right? I mean, I don't want to buy a license for Red Hat. Now, I know I could get my developer and I could go out and I could do that. I could just run Red Hat. I could do that. But Red Hat could just as easily a year from now say, oh, well, we're going to get rid of this program because we don't need it anymore. And if you want to join up, here's your subscription fee that you need to pay us. So I don't want to be back in that boat again either. So anyway, that's all I had for today. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe. And to my Patreon contributors, thank you so much. I do appreciate the generous donations that you all have made to this channel. I am dedicating that money strictly for hardware so that I can keep my systems up to date so I can bring you additional videos that will help explain running the systems on real hardware. And I want to get back to that, but I don't have a machine that I can pull out just yet. I think as soon as I can get ZFS tested fully, and I'm still testing it. I mean, I don't trust it yet. Probably will be a while on Linux anyway. I don't trust it as much as I did on FreeBSD. But once I get to that point where I'm feeling comfortable with it, and so far it's running great. I don't have any reason not to feel that way, there's maybe some problems with it. But there was some issues, I can tell you, with ZFS 2.0 on Linux, where it would refuse to mount. You had to go and manually mount it each time, which was kind of a pain. That seems to have gone away. Yeah, so that problem seems to have gone away now, so it seems to be doing that just fine. Anyway, hope to see y'all again real soon, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.